Eggs. Day 1. Chapter 1. I don't even like eggs, David said. It's not just the eggs, said his grandmother. So what is it? He no longer bothered to trim the surliness from his voice when speaking to her. She thought for a moment. Well, the activity, participating. Her fists gripped the steering wheel. Her face was locked straight ahead. She was a rotten and terrified driver. Making friends. Make friends. Make friends. Same old garbage. I don't want to make friends. Everybody needs friends. Not me. We all do, David. We're all human. I'm not. No? No. What might you be, then? A moose. He knew she wanted to give him a look, but she dared not take her eyes from the road. She settled for a sigh and a purse of the lips. Now you're just being silly. He let it hang there. Silly. He said nothing, unreplied to. The word would get bigger and bigger, filling the car, suffocating her, forcing her to open her mouth and take it back, swallow it. That would be her punishment. Maybe then she would turn around, take him home, let the Easter egg hunt go on without him. It wasn't even her idea anyway. It was his dad's. They could tell him the hunt was called off, or they got there too late. She opened the window on her side. She said, "Would you like your window open?" He did not answer. "David?" "No." "Want the radio on?" Question time. Try to get him to say yes. "No." "Are you ever going to smile again?" "No." "Are you a boy?" "No." Drat. Tricked. Didn't she know that tricks only made him hate her more? Wasn't the trick his mother had played on him enough? More than enough. Did the world have to go on playing tricks on him? Houses, street corners went by. This was all his life had been since April 29th of last year, a ride to somewhere he did not want to go. They were stopping, pulling to the curb, at the end of a line of cars. "We'll have to walk from here. Looks like a good crowd," she said, her voice all peachy, cheery, like nothing had ever happened. She came around to his side. She opened the door. He stared straight ahead. "David, ready?" "No." "They're going to start in 10 minutes. Good for them." She reached in. She touched his shoulder. "Davy." He jerked away. "My name is David." He did not look up into her face, but he knew she was closing her eyes, trying to be patient. "Excuse me, David. You know what your father said. Tell him we came and it was too crowded." She made a thin, wincing smile. "I don't think so." He looked at her. "We could dye some eggs ourselves and say that's what I found. I'll dye them. You won't have to do a thing." She closed her eyes, smiled painfully, shook her head. David kicked the door and got out. His father had told him to go, but he hadn't said anything about sticking to his grandmother. So he walked fast, zipping ahead of her. He knew she couldn't catch up. He walked past the sliding board and merry-go-round and the tables and benches and grills in the picnic area, and he did something that he often did at times like this. He pretended. He pretended he was doing this for his mother. He pretended she was now lying in a grave in a faraway state, but that she had awakened him the next morning, while it was still dark, just as she had promised, and they had gone out to the lake to see the sun come up, just as she had promised. Chapter 2. Still groggy with sleep, Primrose fumbled for the curtain and pushed it aside. At first she thought she was seeing the morning sun. Then she realized it was not the sun after all. It was an egg, dried and splattered upon the window. Then she remembered the thumps in the night, half heard as she lay asleep. She wasn't surprised. They had egged the other place too. She knew that sooner or later her new place would be discovered. She didn't care. Let them throw a farm full of eggs. They weren't going to stop her from having a room of her own. She closed the curtain. She flung off the sheet and got up, and banged her head. "Ow!" She squawked, plopping back down. She kept forgetting the low ceiling. No matter. It was worth the crouching and duck-walking, an occasional bump on her head. She sat cross-legged on the bedroll. She looked around. Curtains, beanbag, chair, two-door dresser, her dad's picture, makeup tray, the neat stack of House Beautifuls, her sneakers side by side on the floor, just like anybody's. Sure, there was plenty more to do, like maybe a poster for the ceiling, but it was a good start. She grinned. She giggled. She pressed her fist into her chest. She whispered up the scale to a squeal. "A room of my own." She stared down at the bare knees protruding from her red-hemmed nightshirt. Last night was the third time she had slept here, but only the first in her nightshirt. You can't say a room is yours until you've slept in it in your nightshirt. That's what made last night so special. She giggled again. For a good 10 minutes she sat there grinning, soaking it in. At last she folded the sheet, rolled up to bed, got dressed, and went outside. The white of the egg sun had slimed and dried down to the door handle. It looked like the silvery trail of a giant slug. Another egg splat yellowed the bumper. She stepped back to the street. From the inside, with help from the curtains and with little imagination, it was easy to call it a room. But from the outside, from any angle, there was only one thing to call it, a rusty, tireless 1977 Dodge van. a car, a junker. But that would change. In her mind's eye, Primrose saw a house-like paint job, maybe white with blue trim, and a little white picket fence, and a patch of grass and a bird bath and flower boxes for the windows. She pictured it for a little longer and went to the house, the other house. Even now, 5 years after moving here, the size of the house surprised her. It was so small that upon first seeing it, she had assumed it was a garage. Some stubborn eye within her still looked about for the house, not believing that this could be it. But it was. All 4 rooms of it, reading room, bedroom, kitchen, bathroom. She had once seen a picture of a movie star's clothes closet in House Beautiful. They gave the closet's dimensions. She found a ruler and measured her house. The closet was bigger. The reading room, as always, was dark, soft, creepy, unreal. In the bedroom, her mother slept with Willie. They lay shoulder to shoulder on their backs, sheet under chins. The sheets rise and fall with her mother's breathing sometimes fooled Primrose into thinking Willie had come alive. She looked down at them. One mother, one teddy bear. Take away the bear and you'd swear that was one perfectly normal mother sleeping there. Well, not quite. The dark, hushed, spooky reading room. You'd have to take that away, too. And the world's puniest house, which would make the cover of House ugly, if there were such a magazine. And the sign out front saying, Reader and Advisor. And, of course, the bedroom, the one and only bedroom. The bedroom her mother actually, seriously, unbelievably, but believably, too, expected to share with her teenage daughter. Take them all away and leave nothing but the lady in the bed, and then maybe you'd have yourself a normal, everyday mother. Ha! Until she woke up. Primrose got a pitcher of soapy water, a spatula, and a rag from the kitchen and returned outside to tackle the egg splats. She hated removing egg splats. It was both difficult and degrading. Raw egg dried hard. Finished, she realized she was hungry. Chapter 3. David felt for the memento in his pocket, something he often did at rotten times. He did not want to be here, did not want to be standing at top of this hill with a million other yowling and shoving kids, did not want to go racing down the hill, did not want to hunt Easter eggs. Did not. The parents were behind, cheering on their little darlings, lots of mothers, a whole flock of mothers. A man in a straw hat was talking through a bullhorn. The grass at the bottom of the hill was tall, shaggy. The man said that's where the eggs were, in the grass, in front of the trees. David stared and squinted as hard as he could, but darn if he could make out a single egg. He wondered if this whole thing was a trick just to get him to make friends. Get ready, commanded the bullhorn voice. Several big kids darted forward. Hey, David heard himself say, but the big kids were already swaggering back to the line, laughing. All right, one more. Get ready. Again the same kids broke. This time they went halfway down the hill. The bullhorn yelled at them, told them they would be kicked out if they did it again. They came back making honking noises. Big kids. One last time. Get ready. The man lowered the bullhorn and glared. There were giggles and flinches, but no one broke. Get set. Glare, silence, eyes, bullhorn. Wait. You could almost hear the eggs. David's toes tightened, and suddenly a kid was lurching down the hill, head over heels. He came trudging back up, yelling at the bullhorn, flinging his arm. They pushed me. It doesn't count. He grabbed another big kid and heaved him down the hill. That's what they did. Little kid shrieked with delight. Somebody pushed another big kid. The kid went lurching, his legs wheeling as if on ice, as if on a wet floor. And for a moment, David felt his heart stop. That was how his mother died, from a slip. Another kid popped out of the egg hunt line, and another. The line was no longer a line, but a smear, surging and howling. Eggs! Eggs! The boldest of the little kids breaking away now, and the first kid yelling. I can see 'em! And the landslide was on. An avalanche of kids, the bullhorn bleeding in vain. Stop! Stop! Alone at the top, David screamed. Hey! Didn't you ever hear of rules? Hey! David had always been a pretty law-abiding kid, but ever since April 29th of last year, he had become a stone stickler for rules, except his grandmother's. And so, as the fastest kids were already plucking eggs from the grass, David remained at the top of the hill, calling, Hey! Hey! And now the bullhorn was aiming right at him, and the voice was booming, Young man, go! Now! And down he went. Chapter 4. Eggs everywhere. Sky blue, pink, yellow, lilac, pastel treasures, and a shaggy grass pie. There were too many. He wanted them all. He wanted piles. He wanted armloads. He could not aim his attention at only one. He could not pick out the first. Meanwhile, eggs were disappearing. Hands, as if triggered by his eyes, were snatching them as fast as he could spot them. There was a pink one. Gone. Over there. Gone. There. Gone. David was already breaking the prime rule of Easter egg hunting. Be quick. Gone. 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 He was spinning himself silly. He moved nearer to the trees, looking for less busy areas. He knew now there would be no armloads. He He would settle for several, a few. He saw big kids with 3 in each hand. They were ripping off the beautiful shells and chopping half an egg at a time and spewing white pieces as they laughed and pounced for more. Little kids were turning to the hilltop and hoisting their eggs and yelling, "Mommy, look!" And then suddenly he spotted one that everyone else was missing, buried in the grass, just a sliver of blue showing. He walked over to it, casually pretending he didn't see a thing. He knelt down, combing his fingers through the grass, pretending to search. He snatched it. It was his, a sky-blue miracle in his hand. He rolled to the sun-washed hilltop, thrust the egg high, and then the sun was gone, blotted by the bulk of a big kid. "Where'd you get that?" "Or where'd you get it?" the kid said. David pointed. "There." The kid nodded. "That's what I figured. It's mine. I dropped it there." He held out his hand. "Fork it over." Drat, thought David. What rotten luck. He forked it over. The kid walked away. His pockets were bulging. By now, kids were racing back up the hill, waving their treasures. David went on sweeping with his eyes, his sneakers. Nothing but grass trampled flat. He moved into the trees, beyond the last hunter. He knew the bullhorn man had said there were no more eggs in the trees, but he didn't say you weren't allowed to look. And besides, it was the only hope left. Leaves left over from last autumn crinkled underfoot. He peered into the shadows. It was different here, quiet, peaceful, indoors-like. The trees, so tall, so still, seemed to be waiting for something. Somewhere, car engines were starting up. He moved deeper into the shadows, wading through the leaves, looking, and there, straight ahead, a gleam of color, yellow, the clear, unmistakable roundness. Egg! As he approached, he half expected it to vanish or the sun-blotting kid to show up. Neither happened. What did happen was that he noticed how tall the egg was. It was standing, a solitary yellow egg, standing on one end of a large hump of brown leaves. He knelt beside it. He picked it up. The first thing he noticed was the red marking that circled the egg on the end where it had stood. The second thing he noticed was the dark hole that was left when he lifted the egg. How could there be a hole in a pile of leaves? With his fingertip, he moved a leaf. Red appeared. He moved another leaf. Another. He froze. Lips. David knew he had a choice. He could stand up and walk away and forget it all, or he could move more leaves. One thing he had learned already. The marking on the egg had come from the red lipstick on the lips of the open, O-shaped mouth that had held the egg upright like a golf ball tee. He wondered what rules were involved here. He began to brush away leaves. A chin came into view, a nose, cheeks, eyes. The eyes were closed. The eyelids were a glittery purple, the cheeks a blush of pink. He brushed away leaves until the whole face was showing. A lady's face, or a girl's. He wasn't sure. Whichever, it was the most beautiful face he had ever seen. He spoke to the beautiful face. "Are you sleeping?" The eyes did not open. He could not decide if he wanted them to open. The humped eyelids, with their glittery purple, were like tiny twin eggs, bird's eggs. "Are you going to say something?" The mouth did not move. "You're dead, aren't you?" The beautiful face was as still as the trees. He was not afraid. "My name is David. I'm 9. My mother died too. She hit her head. Her name was Carolyn Sue Limpert. We used to live in Minnesota. That's a state. I have a memento in my pocket, but nobody's allowed to see it." He thought for a moment. "I guess it's okay to show it to you." He took out the memento and held it before the closed, glittery eyes. It did not move. He returned the memento to his pocket. A button on threads, Daddy Longlegs, came walking across the leaves onto a cheek. With a finger flick, he sent it flying. His name was being called. He stood. "I have to go now." He started to walk away. He stopped and came back to her. With great care, he placed the yellow egg back on her mouth. "Bye," he said, and ran. When he saw that he was the last kid heading back up the hill, when he saw his grandmother's eyes wild with worry, he slowed down. Chapter 5. David had dreams that night. He kept hearing his mother's voice calling him from the top of a sunlit hill. She was a shadow within thin, tinted shells of eggs, speaking to him in sounds he did not understand. He saw leaves, a figure darkly rising, shedding dry leaves, rising silently as moss in wooded silence, and he tried and tried, but he could not see her face. There was no school the next day, Easter vacation. David bolted from the house as soon as he woke up. Let his grandmother figure out where he was. He rode his bike. He did not need directions. Even though the park was a mile away, he had biked there before. He had biked all over this new town of his, Perkiomen. Not that he really wanted to, but he wanted even less to be stuck in the house with his grandmother. Plus, biking was something you could do by yourself, which he usually was. It was hard to pick out the hunting ground without all the people around, but when he walked his bike down the steep hill and onto the trampled grass, he knew he was there. Pastel chips of eggshell glittered in the thatch. He parked his bike at the tree line and re-entered. It seemed for an instant his dreams. He went straight ahead for the spot. He knew at once that something was wrong. The yellow egg was gone, and the leaves, still a pile, were shallow now, not heaped as before. Gingerly at first, then more forcefully, he kicked at the leaves, broomed them away with his foot until they lay flat and scattered on the ground. No lips, no eyes, no beautiful face, nobody. He went deeper into the trees, seeking tracks, scraps of clothing, evidence. Had animals carried her off in the night? Eaten her? Had someone found the body and notified the police? Yes, he decided, that was it. The police had come and taken photographs like in the movies and carried her away on a stretcher with a sheet over her from head to foot. When he returned home, his grandmother was in a tizzy. She talked in that whispery, patient voice of hers. She never yelled. As usual, she was full of whys. Why this? Why not that? She couldn't get it through her head that he didn't give a rat's rump about whys. As usual, she slipped his father into it. If you won't behave for my sake, David, or even your own, you should at least behave for your father's sake. He's trying his best to provide for you. That's why he drives all the way to Connecticut and back every week. That's why he's so tired all the time. He's overwhelmed. His father's company needed him to manage a shopping mall in the state of Connecticut, over 200 miles away. He was home only on weekends. David knew exactly what overwhelmed meant. It meant less time for David. She finally came to the end of her speech, saying, I think you ought to stay in the house for the rest of the afternoon. This was how she introduced all of her infrequent punishments. I think you ought to, more plea than command. She delivered punishment the way she drove a car, timid, nervous, afraid of a backfire. David's usual answer was, I don't think I ought to. And he would do as he pleased. But this time he had a problem. He actually wanted to stay in the house because he wanted to be there the instant the daily newspaper arrived. He was sure news of the body would be all over the front page, but staying in the house would give his grandmother the impression that he was obeying her, which was unthinkable. He could not leave. He could not stay. He sat mired in the living room, wondering what to do. His grandmother went back to her housework. Every so often she would glance over at him. Her looks became more and more kindly, sympathetic. Any minute now she might decide to say, Okay, David, you've stayed long enough. You can go out and play. And for the rest of her life, she would smugly believe she had successfully punished, then pardoned him. He could not allow it. Think. He went into the kitchen and got a mango madness from the refrigerator. There were always bottles of mango madness on the bottom shelf. As he drank at the kitchen table, the answer came. He popped up and swaggered past her as she was watering a plant. Guess I'll go out, he said as if to himself, and headed for the door. David, she called, but she had lost and she knew it. One more, limpid David, and he was out the door, slamming it behind. He took his time. She would not come to the door. She would not call after him. She would not do anything to upset him. She would sigh and close her eyes and remind herself that he had already had enough upset for a time. It was all part of what she called the sadness. Nor would she tell his father, for he was already overwhelmed. David sauntered down the street. No one, not his grandmothers, not anyone, could touch him. His mother's death had made him invincible. Chapter 6. The answer was so simple. All he had to do was wait outside for the paper girl, meet her down at the end of the block. Hanging on the corner, he worked on his yo-yo stunts and thought about the paper. He was sure the entire front page would be filled with the story. There would be a big picture, maybe in color, showing the mound of leaves and the beautiful face and the yellow egg, and a headline with letters fat as fingers would say, Body Found in Park. He wondered if they would give her a name. He had never seen his mother's full name in print until he saw it in the newspaper, Carolyn Sue Limpert. At last he spotted the paper girl. He ran to her, got the paper, fell to his hands and knees, and spread it out right there on the sidewalk. There was a headline all right, but it said, Little Leaguers, Ready to Roll. The picture was in black and white and showed a kid batting a baseball to his dad. No mention of a body in the park. Not on page 1 or 2 or any of the other pages. At 5 o'clock, David went up to his room and turned on the news. Nothing there. Later in bed, he watched the 11 o'clock news. Not a peep. Tuesday was more of the same. A ride to the park, newspaper, TV. He even widened his search at the park in case it was animals after all, and they carried her off and maybe buried her so they could go back and dig her up whenever they got hungry. Like squirrels with acorns. He found nothing that looked like a freshly dug hole. Wednesday, he called the police. He thought about biking to the station and talking to them in person, but he chickened out. The voice on the other end said, Police Department, Sergeant Wolf speaking. David did not know what to say. The voice repeated, Sergeant Wolf speaking. David said, The voice said, May I help you? David said, Silence except for a beep that sounded every few seconds. You've reached the Perkman Police Department. Do you wish to speak to the police? Beep, beep, David blurted. Did you find a body? More silence, more beeps. The voice said, will you repeat that, please? Did you find a body? Who is calling, please? David. David who? Why was this man asking questions? David was supposed to be asking the questions. Did you find a body? Did you see a body? Maybe. Maybe? Where? At the park, maybe. Where at the park? The trees. And what did you say your last name was, David? David froze. He slammed down the phone. The receiver was wet from the sweat on his hands.